it's useful to try to cross the various, this was a runner-up word for the word of the year this year, apparently, echo chambers, right? Get out of your own echo chamber and see what's being talked about in the other echo chamber. Maybe they've debunked this story, or at least see what they're saying about it, and come to as informed a judgment as you're able to. Ultimately, I think a key is transparency. The more that we can that we know, oh, this website is just trafficking in fake news, right? We all kind of laugh when somebody gets fooled by The Onion, right? Because it's known to be, it has a reputation, and is completely explicit about the fact that it's fake, satirical, purely for entertainment value. We need to work on getting the right reputation and getting the capacity of people to tell, oh, this Facebook account which claims to be Americans for patriotism is actually Russians for trying to twist the American election, right? The more we can tell what's going on in terms of who the sources are and manage the reputational task, and the internet is very good at managing reputational issues to some extent. We haven't yet really brought that into news platforms and sharing, but I think the key is to find ways to let the reputation of the fake news purveyor catch up with them. And there can be they can keep creating new websites and so forth, but try to find ways to have that catch up with them. And I think that will hopefully help. I believe in democracy and freedom of speech as solution combined with openness and transparency.
Thank you, Jesse. And I know Jacob is a researcher for the pilot. I'm curious to know if you can share with us some of your best practices for fact-checking that we can use in our own responsible consumption of news.
I think he's right in stating that we need to step outside of our silos, step outside of what's presented to us on our news feeds, on Facebook or Twitter. If you have a couple of different Twitters with different names that you may look at, you can kind of tailor the algorithms. So you can have, let's say, a Twitter that you look at that's primarily liberal news that's coming your way, and you can have another Twitter that you look at that's conservative news. You can have another Twitter that's just off-the-wall fake news, and make sure, this is one thing that I do. I kind of check all my different feeds because I know that the algorithms have figured out what I want to see based on my likes, and so I'm kind of feeding the machines to feed me more of what I like, and then so I balance my feeds that way, but at the same time I step away from this. I go to the actual source. I go to the New York Times. I go to the Washington Post. I go to InfoWars, and I see what Alex Jones has to say. That's fun. You visit Gateway Pundit. You see what's happening over there.
I went to school with him. Very high school.
Yeah. And so you kind of, you realize that these algorithms have figured out what you like to eat, and sometimes you have to not eat the Ben and Jerry's, but you eat the cauliflower, and you digest it, and you try to understand it, and that leads to conversations with your colleagues, your friends, your enemies. And it makes you and them better informed citizens. And at the same time, you gain an education. You can see what is important to other people. You can see where they're getting their news from. Why are you reading Alex Jones? Why are you relying on that? And you can, I think, better yourself and better your community that way. But step away from the news feeds and read or watch CNN or watch Fox or watch MSNBC or read the Times, read the National Review. Just don't rely on one source of information.
That's great advice for all of us to be responsible consumers of fake news and real news, hopefully, from here on. All right, well, that wraps up the questions for the panelists, and now we'd love to have you, the audience, ask questions as well. So if you can please stand up to the microphone right there in the middle so that everybody can hear your questions, and we'd love to hear your thoughts and ask away.
There we go. Well, thank you very much. Muchas gracias. And this has been very interesting, and you've mentioned several key words that were very prevalent in my former profession, that is before I retired, namely disinformation and misinformation, which of course borders on propaganda, as some of you mentioned. However, I said one word that I had missed in your presentation, and it's both a noun and a verb. And the noun is a lie, and the verb is lying. And I think we see many people lie. I used to have a principle in my former profession, which was tell the truth. Always tell the truth. Don't necessarily tell the whole truth. And I stuck to that for some 40 years. Interviewed by journalists and other professional people. Another term that you haven't mentioned is the one that has been keyed lately, namely alternative facts, that I had never heard before I came to this country, which was 2 years ago. And I hadn't heard that fact until about a year ago. That is also a lie. And the only way we can avoid lies, in my opinion, and this is not going to be a question, as you probably already gathered, the only way we can avoid a lie is to don't use social media for factual information. Use trusted news sources. I have no idea what the Virginia Pilot is. I gather it's a newspaper.
The largest in Virginia.
Well, I'm new here. I've only been here since the 24th of August. Go to reliable sources. And don't go to the sources that only always speak to a certain audience. Because you will always enjoy, as somebody said, to hear what you already know or what you already think. I learned to my great despair the other day that one of the television channels here is the most listened and watched news source for the American people. And it only speaks to a certain kind of people. It tells them what they want to hear. And the latest example of this is, of alternative facts is, I think it was yesterday or today, there was the English language is very funny. I talked about an incident in New York City. Now, to me, when 8 people die, it's not much of an incident. It's something much more tragic than that. A spokesman for the American people, elected by the American people, talked about that. And it is on audio, and it is on television. Today, the spokesperson for this elected official said that he hadn't said what he actually did say. That is to just change the facts. And we have to be observant of that.
Well,
take care.
Thank you for sharing
Never
your thoughts
lie.
with us. Yes, that's great advice. And we just have a few more minutes.
This is a very uneducated question, but I am curious. You spoke about the generational gap. Do you think President Trump encourages fake news to distract political issues? And why has this not been the issue before him? In your professional, not political opinion, do you think this is a coincidence?
All right. Your question. You're saying has generational gap been a problem before? Is that what you're asking? Okay. I think that it has been often. I don't think that people realize, most of the time people don't realize because of the generation they're in, that there was generational gaps between a lot of generations. The current generation in the college setting is capable of now and understands now isn't something that your parents necessarily understand, correct? So, and anybody that is my age or older and has children or is raising children that are in between of that next generation, they don't understand why Mario had to go from one side of the screen to the other, let alone what the rest of the generation had to deal with. Those that are 2 or 3 generations before me understand that when it came to media, Walter Cronkite, those types of journalists were a foundation of what was media and what was news. And you tuned in and you never questioned what was being said. But now you have to. And that has continued as we've gone from the invention of the television to where we are now with social media. So it's not, there has been generational gaps. There's always going to be generational gaps. There will continue to be generational gaps forever, because that's just that's nature of culture, of the human culture.
Thank you. Next question.
Well,
Just to further that,
wasn't an answer.
do you think it is a lack of leadership as to why fake news hasn't been shut down earlier?
I think that this goes to my point about Alien and Sedition Act. Fake news is facilitated by the freedom we enjoy. Everybody has the right to make up stupid stuff and put it out on whatever web platform they can pay or borrow to spread it. And so shutting it down is really our responsibility as citizens in terms of being informed and in terms of developing capacity to recognize the fake.
Thank you. And we have time for one more question.
So my question is, for you all in the news organizations, what do you feel your personal opinions, like how, the question is, it's like whenever I turn the news on and you all have a panel of people talking, and as the reporter pushing their own personal opinion to a matter, but doesn't actually understand, like they're not coming from a scientific fact, or they're not a politician. So does that skew what is truthful news, is when you actually put your own opinion in? I mean, I know you might have come to these questions before, but I just turn the TV off, honestly. When opinions start flying out there with no factual back, like no facts backing it up.
Sure. So I think that may be directed at me. So I'll try to take a stab at it. Trust me, I don't take offense to it. So years ago when I first started my career, I was pursuing journalism. One of the things that a professor told me is that everyone, every journalist, every reporter, everyone you will ever meet comes with a bias, because we all come from different backgrounds. So my hometown shapes a certain thought. I grew up in Georgia, so because I grew up in the South, my thought about certain things is shaped in that. What's important, though, as a journalist, is that your bias does not dictate the way the story is told, that you do seek as many opinions, as many different sides as you can. Because one of the things that Laura mentioned is that, this question of what is truth. Your truth and my truth about the exact same situation may be different. So as a journalist, as a reporter, I think it's important that you get as many different sides. And I mentioned, police being one source of information. You get many different sources. And somewhere in that is the absolute truth, because everyone has their own truth. As to opinion, I think it's important to realize that a lot of the networks now, they have shows that are specifically designed for opinion, right? So there is this difference between a news organization, the Virginia Pilot, Wavy TV, an organization that our purpose is to disseminate fact about what's happening in our community. That's our job. That's our role. There are organizations, say MSNBC, Fox News, they have shows that are designed just to have folks on a panel giving an opinion. How they choose those folks, I have no idea. Their background or why they're selected, I honestly don't know. And that would be a question, to be frank, that would be a question for them about how they select people for those panels and to give their opinions. But I think it's important, and we've discussed this on the panel, but I think it's important for anyone that's consuming information to be able to understand what you're consuming. Is this facts? Is this an opinion? Is this real? And using different sources, I think, would help anyone be able to do that.
Jeff?
And just to follow up on that, the one thing you want to be clear about is the difference between a reporter and a pundit. And I think you were conflating those two wherever you went off.
Yeah.
Brandy's an anchor and a reporter. She's not a pundit. So she wouldn't get on air and give her opinion. But there are people paid to do that. And that's the difference between those two things. So unfortunately, the 24/7 news has also exacerbated this problem in that they have all this time to fill, so they fill their hours with punditry instead of reporting. And so people, unless they look closely, they don't know how to separate those two. And one of the things, there was as coincidence would have it, today NPR dropped a thing on fake news. They quoted high schoolers from 50 different states. And I happened to find the one from Granby High School right here in Norfolk. And her quote was, "I think fake news is a problem because media outlets tend to promote bias, and a lot of individuals cannot distinguish between biased information and unbiased information." And that quote makes me very, very sad. Because the problem is, what they really can't distinguish between are media outlets that try to give unbiased reporting of the facts, and those media outlets that don't. That they come from the position of either a liberal, especially in politics, either a liberal or a conservative point of view, and everyone now conflates media, all of these media outlets together. And I can tell you what we do to keep our own biases out. We're a check on each other. One of the things you learn to do as a professional journalist is to be the devil's advocate. That's one of my main jobs as an editor, is to be the devil's advocate. You grill each other in order to sift through those biases, in order to, as Brandy pointed out, in order to get to some, fair version of what the truth is. We can't be, we're subjects, we're not objects. We can't actually be objective, but we can be fair and we can be accurate.
Thank you, Jeff. And I believe we have just one more minute. And Sean, I was curious to get your opinion as well on this issue of bias.
I always tell my students, I always ask them on the first day of class, in one of my classes, I say, is there such thing as truly objective journalism? And some of my students raise their hand, they're like, oh yeah, I think truly objective, unbiased journalism is possible. And then the next thing I say is, no, it's not. It's not possible to have truly objective, unbiased journalism. Because honestly, even if you're telling both sides, you still have to pick from the thousands of stories that exist out there. You have to decide which stories are worth putting on air, are worth getting published, are worth your time. So to a certain extent, fake news exists and biases exist, and it's hard to have truly objective journalism. But if you're a reporter who's looking at it from the perspective of I'm going to do my best to do this and to tell both sides of the story, then I think that's where we hope journalism goes, and that's where I hope my students who graduate and become journalists, I hope that's what they strive to do.
Excellent. Thank you, Sean. Well, these are great questions, and it certainly provided a lot of food for thought for all of us. Just a quick housekeeping item to students. As you leave the room, remember to grab your exit tickets. On the back of the ticket, you will have a link to the survey that tells you how you can get that extra credit you're all looking for. And I do want to extend my sincere appreciation to Dr. George Fowler and Lucinda Rush for sponsoring and coordinating this panel. And thank you, our distinguished panelists, and also our wonderful engaged audience for being part of this very important conversation. So please check the library's website for more events like this one. And remember, you can always feel safe to like, share, and retweet a message from ODU. Have a good evening, everyone.
Do you need a ticket? Yep. Okay. Do you need a ticket? Thank you. Okay. Do you need?
Yes, ma'am.